Welcome to VUC 2019, Visions Under Construction.
This call may be recorded. Well, actually, is being recorded for whatever purposes we like, because we can.
Thank you, Allison. That was obviously Allison Smith, our old friend, our friend of a long time, I should say. We need to remind you, to come to meet us at Kamailio World Conference and Exhibition. And I will be exhibiting myself May 6th to May 8th, 2019 in Berlin. Yeah, Corrado's going crazy, but this gives me a chance, if I can find Chrome, gives me a chance to switch over to my actual camera. So let's do that. Although apparently the actual, why did I say actual twice in the same sentence? The difference, the latency in the cameras has improved to the point where you can't tell which camera I'm on. Is it real? Is it live? Or is it Memorex?
Is it real?
Is it
it
real?
fun?
So
Is it
my buddy
fantasy?
back here, my brother, is wearing his asterisk hat. And we are going to talk a little bit about a lot of things. I don't know what happened to Jay. We had Jay Carpenter with us. He's going to talk blockchain. And if he talks AI, we have the drinking game, blockchain AI drinking game. I just said it, so go.
Okay. So, and backups, I think. Backups on cloud and things. And
That
I have something to add to
Michael's going to start this with, and Jay's back. So hello, Jay. We're going to get to you in a moment, Jay. Michael's got his thing, and then we're going to go around the table. So, Michael, rant.
this is a practical thing that comes out of a group that I participate in. There are people who do streaming media production, and it's a good group. Like them a lot. Very interesting. However, I'm noticing a trend, and the trend is to, well, I'm just going to say it outright. There's a bunch of whining that goes on, and the whining is like this. It is, I installed this beta on my production system, 2 hours before my live event was supposed to happen, and I had a problem, and the problem was blah. Doesn't really matter what it is, although in this particular case, it was one about software licensing breaking, because they had installed commercial software more times than the license allows. And they immediately turned to the manufacturer of the software, who, by the way, are a great bunch of guys. And they say, your licensing scheme is broken. And I say to you, no, that's idiocy. That's fobbing off your irresponsible decision for installing new software on critical production systems immediately before an event without making a backup. And so I kind of being the sort who says, and when I lived in the broadcast space, we had a rule. I would go someplace for a week and I would work there and I would do software updates and everything was cool. But the rule was, if I was there Monday to Friday, no changes to production systems within 24 hours of my departure. It had to run for a continuous day perfectly before I left, or I didn't get to leave, right? And I'm sure you guys in your working lives have these sorts of things. You don't jerk with working systems just for sport, right? But if you did, right, you got to own it. And so what I am preaching to this community, not this community assembled right now, but this production people's community, is storage being dirt cheap and tools being effectively free. Before you make any change to an important system, you image that puppy. You don't even make a backup. You image the whole dang thing so that you have a 15-minute restore to functional capability. And they are whining, and they are saying, oh, no, they got to fix their licensing scheme. This shouldn't have happened. I'm like, that's not owning it. You got to own it. It's your tool. You gotta own it. If you got a live system floating around the country and you don't have a backup, I mean, in the box or in your computer bag on a portable hard drive, whatever. If you don't have functional backups, you're just being irresponsible, and all the rest is fluff. So that's my thing. And then the question you all were talking about, storage online and S3 and Wasabi, and the way we do things around here is we literally image systems to a NAS, and then the NAS is synchronized to a Dropbox account. I mean, whatever your solution is, that's fine, as long as you have a solution and you're taking responsibility. And there you go. And with that, I accept that I wear the rants in the family.
Can I point out a thing? If those are production companies, so businesses, and they have just one system live that they're using, and they don't have a staging system where they do experiments and they do testing of beta software, that's not how you run a company. You cannot run a company with just one live system. You need a staging. That is also a backup system that anything goes wrong is probably less powerful, a little older, but you can run your business with. That's not a business model with just one. Would you cross a bridge with just one rope, or do you prefer a bridge that takes you across?
That's funny, Corrado. I have an anecdote about that idea of the production system and the testing platform. That is good wisdom, and that's the way you should do it. But at one time, and I don't remember who this was, so I'm not going to mention it online, they had a production system up, and then they had their staging. Staging is the word, staging system. And they had in place something in their staging thing that they were wanting people to try in beta. And in fact, it was referring to 127.0.0.1. So when you did something with it, there was a certificate problem. And I wrote them once, twice, 3 times. Look, guys, you have a problem here. You're using HTTPS with a thing that doesn't have a certificate, and as a result, it's failing, and it's not. Anyway, long story short, it took a long time for them to get that they were doing this. But yeah, other than silly things like that, you have a staging server, basically, or an area, and then you have your online stuff. Going around the table, Corrado, you're the guy on Linux, and maybe Jay's doing some Linux too. We all do some. I don't have anything Linux at the moment at all. So I want to mention very quickly that I signed up a couple of months ago for Wasabi because I thought that their costing compared to S3 was really interesting, and found some this is for Mac. I found some software that it's a program that I've used for years, an app called Transmit, and Transmit speaks S3. So when you have something that talks to the S3, whatever that's called, API or whatever, you can also change the server name. And if, in the case of Wasabi, they do this S3, gosh, I can't remember how you say this.
It's an S3 compatible API.
It's compatible API. So when you talk to it, you can have an API client or a client that works with API, like Transmit, and there are many others. And I'm going to mention CyberDuck, which works also with Windows and Mac. Corrado, I told you earlier today, they must have a Linux client. They don't, but there's some other thing that I also mentioned. I think it's duck.sh. There is a way to connect to this whole thing. It's kind of a mess, but anyway, it does work. The point is that once you're talking through this S3, I have S3, so I have Jungle Disk, for example, and Jungle Disk works through S3. Jungle Disk had a deal, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, lifetime Jungle Disk. You'll pay once and it's lifetime. So far, that's been true. And it's probably going for over 10 years. Unlike Fastmail, who said, hey, pay us once and it's lifetime. And then like several years later, they go, until it's not. We don't want you anymore.
Lifetime sometimes is mentioned as lifetime of the account, lifetime of the person, but also lifetime of the product. So if they
Well,
retire the product, is no longer.
let me be clear. Lifetime is fast mail is still on. The product is still on. They just decided they did not want to keep people who paid once. I'm not talking free now. I'm talking pay us once and we'll remove the ad, when you're using email, fastmail.com or fastmail.fm, actually, I think it is. Anyway, when you're using email, their thing was they had a signature. So you can remove the signature that says sent by fastmail, blah, 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 their little ad. You could remove that. And I don't know how much it was. It was $20 or something. But the fact that they say, and I probably said this once, twice, or more on this already, but the point is when somebody tells you pay us once and it's good, Fastmail is still in business, but they sent out a thing saying, well, we can no longer support blah, blah, blah. Hey, you said pay us one time and it's good forever. So I wrote them and said, well, what's the deal? And they go, well, actually, it's not because that's the way the EULA works. So get over it.
Yeah.
But that's not cool, in my opinion. I mean, what they should have. Let me just to finish, and I want to hear what you have to say. But just to finish, Corrado, what I would have done in their place is, look, here's what we'll do. We will leave you your email address, and we will forward, up to some bandwidth because we had almost none anyway. We'll forward everything. You keep the address. We'll forward it to any address you want, and that's lifetime because you paid for lifetime. Because I don't care. We weren't using it. Neither one. We had 2 of these accounts. Neither one of us were using them. It was all forward. But no, there's like, we're giving you a year free, and then you have to pony up whatever it is to do it. So I do not consider Fastmail to be decent, and I don't consider them to be an alternative. Anyway, what were we going to say, Corrado?
I was going to say some businesses do that is called bait and switch. So they get you somewhere and they move the goalposts after. I guess the model was no longer viable because what's costing now is not physical connectivity, but traffic. So probably the traffic was hitting them in the pockets. And also doing the forwarding would have had the same effect because if the cost is just the traffic of your mail going in and out, they have to pay for that anyway. That's what at higher level connectivity is the bulk of the cost for anything you do. And that's why Amazon S3 is so expensive because you pay egress. So you don't pay to upload, but you pay to download, and you pay for a number of small features that most of them reconduct to the fact of the traffic going in and out from the systems. And that's where the money is. I think I investigated a bit that question with Wasabi, and they offer, if I'm not mistaken, a remote mount. So it's a remotely mounted disk. So any savvy Linux user knows how to mount a network disk in a permanent mount and folder. It's just an entry in the etcf stub file, or there are a number of other tools that can do that for you, including some stuff in the GUI. So it's not a problem. There's no need for a client. The problem I'm facing is instead, because, and the product I chose to solve that problem is to be everywhere. So have my business data, my business files, my business databases accessible from everywhere, from my mobile phone, Android, so platform and location. I have a cloud storage space with pCloud that I can access through a web browser, through a client on any platform, through an Android phone, an Apple phone, and it's ubiquitous. And it's not just in the cloud, but it's duplicating whatever I choose to duplicate on my local disk. So that also becomes a good backup, because I can back up in different locations all the files that I want, the files I choose. So I have copies of my business files on the cloud, on my business computer at the office, at my home computer at home, and on my telephone, on my mobile phone, on my smartphone. I have some critical files that are duplicated, triplicated. They are 3 times in 3 different devices and on the cloud. I think I'm quite safe.
You're okay. All right. Well, before we move on, I just want to mention that also, for the first time after having Macs for a long time, I kept away from Time Machine. But what I found was that if you put a local volume storage on your Mac OS, and you use Time Machine, which again, I only started using a few days ago, it actually does a pretty good job. I let it go overnight, and it did the 2 local hard drives that I have, one SSD, which is, I think, I don't know, almost a half a terabyte, and the rotating mechanical drive, which could fail anytime because this Mac is from 2011. So that's all backed up to this local drive, which of course could die too, right? Which is why we get to cloud. Why do you want cloud? Because there could be a fire, there could be theft, there could be a failure. So
because off backup is it's almost I think it is in fact legally required for businesses. Your accounting, it's not enough from an insurance point of view to have a backup on site. You have to have off site backup. And in years and years ago, I would take different forms of removable media. I'm not as old as to say 9-track tape, but there were different things that we would literally, the boss would take the backup home, and that's how things would be kept. The key, though, to all of this is culture. It is the culture of taking responsibility for your data and owning it, and not just hoping that it'll be okay, right, which a lot of people seem to do.
That is what the European General Data Protection Regulation hammers in, because it's not just protecting sensitive data from snooping or hacking or stealing. It's also protecting the data of your business. That is, if you accidentally lose it, is a violation of the General Data Protection Regulation. It's protecting your data, not just protecting your data from from violations, from improper access or anything else. It's just protecting the consistency, the quality, the safety of your data, and that you keep your data for the time you are allowed to, safe and sound. And that probably will slowly percolate to the United States and everywhere else, because you have to deal with Europe. So your data protection and your data, the way you treat your own data in the US or in Australia has to be compliant with the European legislation if you want to do business with them. So probably it will influence everyone else. And is education, yes.
All right, Maxim just posted a thing in IRC about the Francis Coppola, what it's not like to have a backup site. That was 2007, and I remember that happening. He lost a film, I think, an entire movie or something, and that happened. But the problem that some of us have, go ahead. I think it's Maximus, maybe.
Oh, lots of family. Also, lots of family pictures going back 15 years. So yeah, very sad for him.
Oh, I thought that he had some kind of a movie project that was lost. But anyway, point is, it's funny because personally, photos are photos, and I'm not worried about losing them. I've never been a big cataloger. And today, of course, you've got stuff, you could have stuff on Flickr, although these EULA changes are a killer, right? A Flickr was bought by SmugMug, I want to say, or something like that. And it became SmugMug, whatever. Who can keep track of all this? Has anyone, raise your hands, has anyone gotten in the last, I'm going to say, let's say this year, because it's been a month into 2019, have you gotten an email saying We really miss you. You haven't logged in for a while from a company that you actually don't know what they do. Anyone?
No.
Am I the only one? Okay. Well, I've gotten 2 or 3 because maybe it's because I join everything. So I got something from some real estate site and I went and logged in and then I asked them to delete my account because I totally don't remember what I was doing with it. Anyway.
Do you join like you buy on Amazon while drunk? Do you join things while you are a bit on the wine or something that you don't remember?
No, but what I use a thing called sneaky mail. So I join a lot of stuff using these fake throwaway, not they're fake, but they're throwaway email addresses. So the stuff comes to me and I don't remember what it is half the time. I mean, a lot of it isn't commercial. A lot of it is like our news aggregators or whatever, you know. Also, I try to do that to keep track of how the spam is coming in because that used to be a big problem. These days, it's much less. Must say that Gmail does an amazing job, particularly G Suite. We used to, on our old business domain, we used to get like hundreds of emails every week, you know, tens of them, dozens a day, because we published 1 million addresses on websites, as some people do. That's reduced down. Last time I looked, like there were 0 spams on that account. And Gmail too does a great job. So that part of it is cool.
They are leveraging the numbers, so they can see if there's a flood of the same email going into many inboxes, and they can account that as not just spam, but
also
mass mailing.
Well, also the phishing thing, because they allow you to declare something as phishing or not phishing if you don't think it is. It's funny because I got a thing from good friends of ours who sent a link to a New York Times article with the comment, I don't know, something like "go figure" or "hey, here's what happens," something that actually looked incredibly spammy and phishing, you know, as if to say, you know, the phishing is usually, look what they're saying about you on Reddit or something like that, which is absurd. But, you know, apparently a lot of people fall for that. This was a link. So it was a link with 2 words. And I think that was their rule. If any of you have used rule-based, and I have extensively, maybe you have, Corrado.
Spam assassin or
spam assassin.
Regular expressions and so on. Yeah, they're a
combined
bit
with, what was the next thing up? I can't remember. Anyway, all of this Bayesian, you know, I'm so tired of that. I'm so not into that, managing the spam detection anymore. But anyway, that's all cool. We've covered basically what I said about Mac, which is that you have a lot of choices, and if you use Time Machine, a lot of things will allow you to transfer your Time Machine backup, which is your whole system, up into the cloud. Before we get to Windows, so where are you at, Corrado, with your backup situation? Because I'm talking Linux now. Windows is another story.
There are so many tools, including rsync, that you can use, low-level tools. To be honest, because I don't care that much about saving everything on my computer, because I don't buy any software. Everything I'm using is free software. I don't have licenses to keep. I don't have anything. All my critical data is on the cloud. So even if my computer goes on fire, I buy a new one, install Linux, and install the applications I need, and then I have my data back down from the cloud. So backing up physically on another support, because again, to be compliant with the GDPR, you need to take the backup away. You cannot keep the backup in the same office, in the same room, or in the same building. I have that already.
But do you have a backup? So let's assume some horrible thing happens, like Brexit, and your entire department is destroyed, and now you're in Denmark or someplace, and you absolutely need to get that same boot disk. Can you do that? To have everything you had installed? No, you don't do that kind of thing.
No. But I download.
You're going to go through 2 or 3 days of installing all the programs.
No. It doesn't take that much. It takes about a couple of hours to put Linux on a standard system, and meanwhile I have all the files I need directly accessible from my phone. If I need to make an offer or something, if I need to do invoicing, I can do that from my phone. So I'm pretty well covered.
That's a good point, actually. I'm actually not so much addressing, because I'm not in business anymore. I'm not addressing that part. But what you're saying is, as far as the billing and all the hours, and so you maybe are keeping track. You maybe you're not, but some people keep track of their hours and their expenses. So that's an important piece of data that I don't have to deal with. And also the whole billing thing. So now the billing, I don't know, are you using anything online? Because I used to use, and I don't even remember the name of this thing, but it was there was a free tier, and I was paying a small amount for billing software. And I don't recall who I was using, but there was an online thing. So that was their problem as far as backups go.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you using?
If I need to mention them, it's Cashflow. They do both the accounting. I can do invoicing and receipts. I can do offers, and there's also HR and the pay as you earn, and then all the payroll. Okay, everything is in one cloud package. Is on the browser, on the cloud. Everything is there. So wherever I am, I can do invoices. What I do for my time and travel and so on, I rely sometimes on my memory, because I do that month by month. But I also get support from, again, my mobile phone that tracks me wherever I go and tells me where I've been, how much time I've been somewhere. So if I go to a client, he knows. That's it.
Okay, so just to mention, I was using FreshBooks before. FreshBooks does have a free tier, and I think for more than one customer billing, you need to pay. But I mean, it's minimal, and I've used it.
I've used it when I started, and I think at the time was about 20 clients and 100 invoices a month or something. It's probably a bit more restricted than that now. It's not good for European businesses, VAT registered businesses. Is more for freelance and small businesses that are not VAT registered. And it's a bit more on the American market rather than in the British and European market. So
absolutely, and I'm on, as the French would say, sitting on two chairs with that, because at the time I was using it, I had American clients, so that was fine. And you're right. I mean, it's much better because you dollars, and so you put whatever sales tax you need to. It's not Eurocentric for sure, and also it worked well for that, but not for necessarily. I never use it for any European clients. I'm going to call on Jay Carpenter. Just, if nothing else, you can talk about anything. But be very interested in your backup situation, first of all, because the blockchain is not enough. Okay, Jay, you've got to back up your stuff. What are you doing on that level, first of all?
Well,
and what platform?
So I'm a big fan of something called the Interplanetary File System, which is a radically different way to Randy, I'm so jealous. Which is a radically different way to manage and address files, and I think it handles many of the things that you're talking about, many of the concerns. I see it as like the next generation of what's next after cloud and so forth. So that's my backup in one sense. The others, I also have been using Time Machine for years and years, and I'm actually, my Mac is in the shop to get an external hard drive put into it, and I'm actually going to be moving off my very antiquated Time Machine and to this external hard drive. But above and beyond that, I'm also moving a lot towards Raspberry Pis and having those connected via IPFS.
Okay, wait
And
1 second, Jay, because you mentioned the interplanetary file system or whatever it's called. We
right,
need to know more about that because okay, time machine is time machine. People can look that up, and I am a, I started using it literally. I mean, I started on Mac like in 2007, and every time I plug a drive in, it says, "Do you want to use this for time machine?" I go, "No, leave me alone." But I finally started, so literally only a few days ago, and now I understand kind of what it is. And I did do an overnight backup, and so it's got my 2 disks. One's a mechanical drive that's spinning, and the other one is an SSD, and that seems to be brilliant in the end. But how does this international, or no, what is it called?
interplanetary
Let's
file
hear more about
system.
how you're using that to back up.
IPFS for short.
IPFS, correct. .io is the domain that you can find out more information. But it's like a combination of BitTorrent and Git. So you've got some very interesting characteristics when you combine those two realms, such as it's content addressed instead of location addressed. So what do I mean by that? Well, right now, our entire web is focused on going to particular locations where particular servers store our data. And that is, let's say, in my view, antiquated in multiple dimensions, some of which we've kind of touched upon today, but both in terms of bandwidth, inefficiencies, the fault tolerance of what if that server goes down or goes away, or what if AWS goes away? What happens then? So IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, is a radically new, or let's say it's a combination of things that have been around for a long time, but it's a way to distribute your data among many, many nodes and have that data available pretty much wherever you want. And if the data, let's say, is in the room next door, you don't have to go all the way halfway around the world and back in order to access that data. So you actually don't even need the internet. In fact, you don't even need TCP/IP. It's you obviously can use all the legacy constructs, but if Randy and Corrado and Michael and Jay are sitting in the same room, we can do a peer-to-peer sharing of our data without having to go out to the internet, to the backbone, or anything else.
So
and that
we can use any kind of network that we are connected with, for example, Bluetooth.
Correct. That's correct. And you take your file and you create a hash of the file, and that becomes the address, which becomes very, very powerful and also very secure, because you can instantly tell if the file you think you're accessing is the file that you want based upon that hash. And if so much as a comma changes to a period in the entire Library of Congress, your hash is completely different. So that becomes very, very powerful.
That in respect of security is important. How protected is that data on IPFS against violation of the General Data Protection Regulations? So is that possible to be accessed by unauthorized third parties?
Well, let's segment your question, Corrado. Let's talk about the security. And there was a recent blog post, actually maybe it was towards the middle of last year, by a company called Coral Health that is using blockchain and IPFS for a new way to approach health records. And I'll be happy to send this out, but they highlighted what's possible with a peer-to-peer encryption approach using IPFS. So imagine that your hashed file is the hash of an encrypted file. Now, all of a sudden, even if somebody has the hash and they can access that file, unless they can break that encryption, they're not going to be able to access your file. And that becomes very, very powerful. Does that make sense, Corrado?
Yes, it does. I don't know if not prohibiting, stopping access to a file encrypted or not is compliant to the general data protection regulations, because the GDPR, let's be honest, is not written very well. It's not written by technicians, but by politicians. So there is a lot of room for interpretation.
So yeah, and that's the second part of your question. Is your first part was how secure is it? And I think this is the most secure approach to file and data management that I've seen. It's totally different than perimeter security. It's totally different than trying to harden the perimeter. You're actually transmitting hashes of encrypted files. And that's incredibly powerful and much more secure, in my view, than trying to harden a perimeter. But if somebody breaches that perimeter, they've got access to the entire, data set. The GDPR is, I'm not going to comment on that. I think that's in so many different dimensions out of step with the contemporary realm that, it's in my view, it's completely unworkable. So.
Well, possibly also because it took quite a while to evolve from the Data Protection Act in the UK and other data protection acts throughout the EU that have been coalesced all together in a single regulation for the European Union. So the moment it was published and asked to be adopted by the different European Parliament, it was already obsolete, because it wasn't addressing some of the new protocols, some of the new systems, and some of the new capacities and features. Especially on information technology, legislation will always be a step behind, and we need to work around that, sometimes with hilarious outcomes. But that is not my my main concern. Is just to point out that there is a bit of jarring between what is the legal framework and what is reality. If you could explain a little bit better how a file, physically a file, sits on the IPFS and how we send it and retrieve it. What is the mechanism and where it's physically located?
And is it private?
Well, so the most secure privacy component is this, working with hashes of encrypted files. So if you have an encrypted file and then you reference that file with a hash of the encrypted file, now all of a sudden, I think you've got a very secure and very private way to connect. Corrado's question is, okay, how do you find that hash? How do you find the content or the files that you're interested in using? And that is where the protocol of IPFS comes in. You run a daemon on your Raspberry Pi or whatever that starts talking to other nodes. And as long as one node in the entire network has the file on their computer, you're going to be able to access that information or that, let's say, encrypted file. And then access that copy and then de-encrypt it, and voila. Not only do you have readily available content and files and data, but you also have, as far as I can tell, the most secure way to store and retrieve and access data and files that I can think of right now. So the underlying way to manage the hashes of the files is through a distributed hash table. So you basically start up your daemon. It goes to some boot nodes that then start talking to other nodes, and voila, you've got this distributed hash table that contains the hashes of the information that's out in the network. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, the fact that we're using a protocol that is similar to that of the peer-to-peer sharing of files, is also possible that the file itself that we put on and take down is not located in a single system, but there are just chunks on every single hard drive everywhere. So it's not directly accessible in its entirety from a single system. Is that correct?
That's correct. And they also have the ability to set up private networks, which I haven't explored much, but I know it exists, and that was one of their more recent additions. However, private networks are great, but kind of suffers from the same problem as perimeter security. If somebody gets into your private network, then voila, they've got access to your content. What I really, really like is the, encrypt all your files and then upload them or add them to the IPFS network and create a hash from that encrypted file. Now, I think you've got something that's very powerful. The next question is, okay, is there a better solution to discovery than a distributed hash table? And I think that's going to be one of the next evolutions in terms of taking this to the next level. So this entire method of managing files. And by the way, IPFS is not the only game out there. There's also something called DAT, and there are things like Chia and other storage and stuff like that that's out there that's kind of operating in a similar way. The thing that I like about IPFS and Protocol Labs that built IPFS is that they've got a very robust community. They've got some of the most, in my view, most impressive developers and talent involved in the project, both in terms of the people that are part of IPFS or the Protocol Labs team, as well as incredible support from very talented people that are just contributing to the open source initiative. The other dimension is that they are working on something called Filecoin, where basically people can earn money by storing other people's data, and you can also pay other people to store your data and make sure that it has a permanence out among the network. And that I think is very exciting. Also, the Filecoin can be used or will be able to be used for bandwidth payment. Which I think
where I was going to, the weak link of an IPFS based file system for local storage, for your own storage, is your bottleneck of the bandwidth you have available. We are used to SSDs that have a 6 gig per second bandwidth. How the problem could be performance of applications that are using IPFS if you don't have enough bandwidth is a bit fickle, and it's also sometimes not enough. You could have timeouts in protocols that are sitting at a higher ISO SI level. There's a lot of things that to get around until we don't have good local connectivity, at least fiber to the premises with a gigabit connection. It might struggle a bit, especially in developing countries where connectivity is or might be a problem.
Well, Corrado, how's the connectivity between Earth and Mars?
Literally very, very poor.
So, to address, connectivity on Earth, they've actually gone beyond Earth. They've actually designed this to truly be interplanetary so that it will work among our entire solar system and perhaps beyond. And, that is a function of, and one of the benefits of this content address system is you can actually have a network that is interplanetary. And yes, you might need to create libraries of data and then update that from time to time, but it is positioned to work among planets, hence the name interplanetary file system.
So latency is in accounting for latency is in the protocol. Another question, very quick: how big is the address space for the hash? Because we could run out of space. How big is it?
So they have built that into the architecture as well. So it's not dependent upon any particular hashing algorithm, such as SHA-256. You can actually change the hashing algorithm, and that's apparent from the hash that's created. It's primarily using SHA-256 right now, but it could use SHA-512 or pretty much whatever.
Yeah. No, my question is how physically how long can be the hash string itself? Is there any limit, or it can be extended at any length? Because at one point, if it's an interplanetary file system and we are addressing every single file with a different hash, we might run out of possible combination of characters and numbers.
Yeah, I don't think that's a limitation, actually, because you can choose your hashing algorithm, and because the current hashing algorithms can accommodate a ton of different hashes. I haven't heard anyone be concerned about running out of the hashing space. Basically,
No, I am not. I'm just trying to not to find the
right.
holes, but to try to define exactly what we are talking about.
Yeah, and the other, I think they've designed this so that there will be ample capacity, ample ways to use whatever hashing algorithm is appropriate to whatever your use case is. It's flexible in that regard, but to shift just a little bit, I'd also like to say that it's much more dynamic than just a static file storage system. You can do WebRTC. You can do. I actually recently saw an example where they were live streaming with the core protocol, which was very, very exciting. So it's much more dynamic than just statically storing files. There is something called IPNS, Interplanetary Naming System, so that you can have a static name or location similar to DNS, and then dynamically attach to that static name you're changing file hashes. So when you change, again, a comma to a period in the Library of Congress, you get a completely different hash. How are you going to manage that? Well, you bind it to something called IPNS, which then becomes your, like, a internet domain, basically. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Jay, can you send me or put in Wire or someplace some of the links to these different file systems that you mentioned, the alternatives, and I'll put them in the notes because I have a conscience now and I try to put more information into the notes that go on the audio podcast, which is more listened to. Let's face it, video, doesn't bring that much value added. People see who we are so they can shoot us down on the street, but they really don't get that much else from it. And they're not going to go to Scotland to look for our friend Corrado. And they're probably not going to come to where I live.
Well, yeah. So yeah, I'll
but those would
definitely
be great.
do that.
No, just send me a quick. You don't have to do any big editorial thing. Just send a bunch of links, and I will be happy to put the notes together with that because you mentioned 2 or 3 things, and including IPFS or IP, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I will, from the links, I will put something together into that note because when people are listening to the audio part, they can then look at the description and they will see all the links. Okay.
I will do that.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you was you posted some videos, some links to videos in our Wire group, private Wire group. And I would want to get a little bit of, because we got about 8-10 minutes left. Let's hear a little report on what you've been up to, because that would be good too. What's been going on in your Phoenix group, and what do all those videos mean? Tell us about it.
So, first of all, the VUC is, which I'm really excited about, is looking at and exploring more and more this decentralized constructs, decentralized web, diaspora, so forth. And what I just talked about with the interplanetary file system, IPFS.io, is along the lines of this decentralization phenomenon that's happening. So I've been running something called Desert Blockchain, which is desertblockchain.com, as just kind of a community in Phoenix for about 4 years now. And we have over 1,700 members. And we've been doing our meetups in universities or, theaters and so forth around Phoenix. And what has been emerging is this need for a decentralized way for us to meet, have locations, have a free reign where we can experiment with the Internet of Things, with video, with audio, etc., without the typical restrictions of, walls and doors and blah, blah, blah. So about a year ago, I came up with this idea of Desert Blockchain Camps, which is along the lines of the Chaos Communications Congress or Chaos Communications Camp, or, there are other similar, there's something called Born Hack, I think in Denmark, that's along the same lines. But what if we had these nomadic locations where we could stand up a camp? We had as few restrictions as possible in terms of, walls, internet, lighting, sound, all that stuff. So the first one was introduced this Wednesday night. We had our first meetup at the first Desert Blockchain Camp, which is in a huge warehouse next to a local university that's basically empty. So we can fly drones in there. We can run, robotic cars and whatever we can do. We got a crazy space to experiment with. But what I've been working on is creating these Desert Blockchain camps that's kind of like a combination of a collaborative workspace, a trade show environment, and hopefully something like Burning Man. So, I call it Burning Man for geeks. But anyway, that's what I've been working on, and you're welcome to share that link if you'd like. The other thing that I'm at work on is on a quarterly basis, we do something called the Arizona Blockathon, which is at arizonablockathon.us. And we get up to 50 developers together by invitation to hack and build on decentralized constructs like IPFS, like blockchain, and so forth. And tomorrow we're going to have our next Arizona Blockathon.us event at a place called Local Motors, which is a company that is building 3D printed autonomous vehicles. And they, in addition to this, pretty interesting concept of having a decentralized automobile or vehicle factory around the world that could be set up in pretty much any location, they also have like 150,000 member community around the world that contributes to their designs. So it's also a decentralized, not only product, but also they're moving towards a decentralized entity and community, which I think is pretty interesting. So that's the mischief that I've been up to, and yeah, it's pretty exciting. What are your comments or questions, Randy? Does that kind of explain some of these things?
It does, and I'm going to ask Corrado the same question. Corrado, you've been moving around, jumping around. What have you been up to lately?
No, not specifically. One thing that Jay said about decentralizing the production of cars, it could be spread on to anything if we get 3D printers of the right size and treating the right materials. But I remember I saw what the Chinese are doing now. They are 3D printing homes. They are just moving the big lorries with concrete, and it's poured into a robotic machine that is practically pouring the concrete without any retaining walls or anything else. It's probably some special concrete that is self-sustaining and is quick drying, but they can build an entire house in 4 days with that. It's miraculous. You can see time-lapse videos that are, you can see the sun rising and going down. So it's just 4 days, and you can see a house being printed by this machine, then finished outside and everything, and rendering and plaster and everything. But the main structure of the house printed in 4 days. And the beauty of that is that you don't, because you're not using bricks, you're not using square, cube bricks. It can be any shape, form, curve, size. Walls can be not just wavy, but they just can open up and close at the top. That you can build a house the shape you want. That's incredible.
Yep. And they can print, I mean, the potential for this to usher in a new realm of housing and structures and whatever is enormous. And you could, there's also experimentation in 3D printing drones and, things, many things other than just cars. And cars is a pretty big deal for sure. But yeah, it is turning digits into materials, and the only thing that limits us then is our imagination. So
we are close to transporting teleportation practically, because we're moving the content of Randy is shaking his head. Of course, the materials have to be sent around, but they can be sourced locally. Yeah, there you go. That's what.
I like what is Michael showing here? Wait a minute.
Yeah, that's Michael showing that.
Oh, that's what is that?
This is not Chinese. The Chinese effort goes back to 2014. This is something that's being done in the U.S. It's basically a similar approach to 3D printing. 3D printing homes using liquid concrete that just gets sort of squished out the way you would expect a 3D printer to work with fusible materials. Just a second, let's see. I can navigate through this a little further.
3D printed home. Yeah, that's very cool.
There you go. Right.
Great use. Ultimate goal is to get, I can't see the cost down to less than
$4,000 a house.
Why not?
$4,000. You can see it. And
Good use of technology.
Yeah.
Very good use.
So you don't have to ship things around.
Right.
So you just ship the components, the materials, but not the finished brick. You can source the cement locally, so it's also less carbon intensive. The carbon footprint is lower. There's a lot of mileage in that.
You know, if I may, because we're just about to finish here, I just want to say that stuff like this, and I'm still watching the video and I've got it on live, we can really do amazing things together if we don't get distracted by calling each other names and doing all kinds of weird shit, basically, online. It's just the human potential, what we've done so far. I mean, I have a photo of a bridge near here. It's a suspensions bridge, but you could think of the Golden Gate Bridge or any other work, big engineering work. We can do amazing things. And it just scares me when I see that we can't always do that, whereas we should be always working towards the positive, towards building things that could profit humanity. It's just it's mind-boggling, the things we can do, and the fact that technologies like 3D printing. I mean, it's one thing. 3D printing is great. And I have a couple of saxophone mouthpieces that were printed via 3D, but you can print homes, you can print all kinds of stuff. And it's just really unfortunate that we can't concentrate on the positive things that we can do together, all of us, including every person on the planet. We can enjoy these things, and we can alleviate poverty, kiva.org. And we can do all kinds of things together. And
can I show you quickly a thing that is
go.
the Queen's Ferry Bridge that has been built in Scotland with Scottish government money. Some of the pylons have been practically 3D printed. They just had a mold and they poured concrete inside as you do, but the concrete was just coming from down the road. So the carbon footprint of that bridge is very, very small.
Right. Fantastic. That's great. Well, I guess the end of this is quick, back up. That was the name of it. And I do want to thank, and I'm going to put myself on the screen only to say that we thank ZipDX, Voxbone, Bluehost, which I didn't put on this, and of course, Voice Gal. Wait a minute, let's get her last thing on here. I asked her to do a couple of these, and here's the last one.
This call may be recorded to play at our Christmas staff party.
Yeah, she's very cool. And with that,